I just found out my husband is a dirty cheater. I don't want to talk too bad about him because, well, he just passed away. However, what he left behind in his inheritance will is going to absolutely blow your mind because out of nowhere, here comes his mistress to tell me this. My name's Sadie, and I met my husband Paul because we grew up in the same small town. We've known each other since we were kids and started to date in my mid-20s. He was never really chivalrous or charming. He was rough around the edges and liked to drink beer while watching television on the weekends. However, there were not many options for me to choose when I was young, so we ended up getting married and had 2 kids, Frank and Tina. It wasn't a great love for the ages or anything, but we worked well together in the beginning. But Paul was a neglectful parent, and I was the only source of stable income when it came to raising our family. I worked at a dental clinic in the city, and I'd wanted to become a doctor when I grew up, but my parents could not afford medical school. After high school, my mother fell sick, so I took some community classes and got a job as a receptionist at the clinic. It provided enough for me and my kids, and sometimes Paul would pitch in. He worked at a construction firm and was occasionally away for work for weeks. About 6 months ago, we found out that Paul has cancer. We were devastated, we were scared. The kids were too young to understand, and they did not have much of a relationship with Paul anyways. However, it rubbed Paul wrong. He was mad that his kids did not care that he was dying and would constantly lash out at them. I became increasingly concerned about leaving the kids with their father when I had to go to work, especially on his off days. As a result, I started asking my father to babysit the kids. In recent months, he'd become increasingly violent towards them. While I can protect them when I'm present, it's when I'm busy with something else that I become truly frightened. The kids have also recognized that they're safer playing at the park away from their father's presence. Paul caught on to it too and yelled at me, blaming me for his kids hating him. He told me that I must have filled their ears with lies to make them hate him. In the past few weeks, he had become more hateful and bitter to live with. However, he had started taking on more work that kept him away from home. Initially, the kids and I were very happy with this new development. However, I soon started to get suspicious. He was unwell, and I did not want him to overwork himself. When I suggest that he should rest, he would lash out, accusing me of not wanting him to earn enough money to get him proper medical attention, so I did not pry too much into his business. But I ran into Paul's boss so we could go at the grocery store. He asked me how I was coping with Paul's cancer news, and I told him that it was challenging, but we were managing. Then he inquired about Paul, which struck me as suspicious, because being his boss, they should have crossed paths eventually, even though his boss doesn't visit every construction site every day. His boss appeared confused and informed me that Paul had been sick on leave for months now. They left me feeling bewildered, so left soon after to avoid causing any further trouble. When I came home, I wanted to ask Paul, but I was afraid that he would react. I thought he might accuse me of lying, so I decided to bury the conversation I had in my mind. The next day, however, the conversation kept echoing in my head. I could not shake it off. I had an unsettling feeling that something was amiss, and I made a plan to follow Paul to work the following day. Pretending to leave for work, I waited outside to see what he would do. Paul did not even seem to notice my car following him as he began to drive. I was sure he did not even know what car I drove, and instead of heading into town, he drove toward the city. At first, I didn't think much about it, assuming he must have had some work in the city. But then he stopped at a fully formed apartment building. Confused, I parked my car further away from Paul. I hurriedly followed him, feeling relieved when I found that the elevator was out of order. He took the stairs slowly, his illness evident in his labored breathing. When he paused, I concealed myself in the stairway, and yes, he waited for a few moments until he caught his breath. And I held my breath in the silence as he took deep and panting breaths. Once his breathing was under control, I heard him ring the bell. By this point, my mind was convinced that he was here to meet another woman. I may have been paranoid, but I knew Paul did not love me, and he would not be in a place like this unless it was for another woman. I made an effort to control my emotions even as he entered the apartment. I waited outside for 5 minutes, hoping to catch them in the act, and when I rang the bell, they did not come out. I had to keep ringing the bell to hear footsteps and murmurs approaching the door. When the door finally opened, a beautiful young woman, younger than Paul and me, emerged. She was only wearing a robe, as if she had just put it on. She gave me an annoyed look when I stood there like a gaping fish, and she asked me what I wanted, but I couldn't find the words to answer. Then I heard Paul call her honey and ask why she was lingering at the door. When he appeared in the doorway without a shirt on, his expression mirrored my shock. The woman casually shrugged at Paul and began to converse with him, but I stumbled backwards. Paul called out to me, but I wasn't running away. I just needed to be away from the sight of both of them together for a few moments. I hurried downstairs and took a moment to catch my breath beside his parked car. I hoped that he would follow me outside, and I was relieved when he called for me again. I confronted him, disregarding the fact that he could not breathe properly due to all the running and his illness, and I asked him if he could do such a thing after everything I've done for him. I reminded him that I was the one taking care of the kids, managing his medical appointments, and even assisting with financial aspects. As his breathing eased, he grew increasingly agitated. He accused me of poisoning his kids against him. I attempted to interject, explaining that we had discussed this multiple times, but he would not let me. He continued that he had pointed out that I had gained a lot of weight recently. Nothing I can't lose to get his attention back, but it got to make, a man's mind wonder. I was so shocked by his words that I nearly cried, but then I felt disgusted with myself for shedding tears over such a man. He did not deserve my tears, and I reminded him that he was not a picture of perfection either. Yet I had not cheated on him. He responded calmly, as if talking to a child, saying he was a man. Furious, I pushed my hands against his chest and called him an unfaithful pig. He yelled that it was my fault. Everything was my fault, and according to him, I was not good to him, and I made his life a living heck. Christy was apparently the only person keeping him sane in the past few months. He said I should be grateful that he had stayed with me at all over the past few years, despite the weight that I'd gained after giving birth to our children. I felt deeply insulted and enraged, so I gave him one final push. It was forceful, and I knew it when he tumbled to the ground. In a fit of anger, I delivered a kick to his protruding beer belly for good measure as he groaned on the floor. Without waiting for him to get up, I left and headed to my car. I was in the house preparing just to pack up Paul's belongings and kick him out when I received a call from the hospital. It turned out that Paul had not regained consciousness since I pushed him, and he was now in the hospital. Well, I rushed to his side, leaving my dad to look after the kids. It's now a week later as I write this post. Apparently, all the running and climbing the stairs had taken a toll on his already weakened body, and he's now in the ICU. I have not had the audacity to tell anyone of his infidelity. I've just been sitting outside his room, neither of us talking when I enter. I kept hoping that I would grow brave enough to leave him in the hospital, but I knew it would be a horrible thing to do. I know I should feel guilty for potentially being the reason for his condition, but I don't. In truth, I don't feel much of anything. The infidelity and now the deteriorating health have been too much for me to process. I was tempted to mention the absence of his mistress, the one who supposedly kept him sane for the past few months, but I could not bring myself to utter words to this pathetic man. I don't even know why I'm writing this. I just feel incredibly alone and unable to talk to somebody about all this. Maybe I thought that typing this here would provide some relief. Perhaps it would help me find my voice again. Regardless, I don't feel sympathy for him. My only regret is that I don't have the time to remove him from the house before he had to be hospitalized. Top comments. Comment number 1. I'm so sorry to hear about your situation. Sadie, Paul sounds like a horrible, bitter old man. You were clearly doing what's best for your family, and it was Paul who was being horrible to his own kids and you. Dealing with infidelity and a deteriorating relationship can be emotionally overwhelming. It's essential to prioritize your own mental well-being in such a difficult time. Taking time to process your emotions might be a good idea at this point. Going home for a few days might provide you with the space and clarity you need to reflect on your situation and decide what's best for your future. Paul's actions are his responsibility, and he can't just blame everything on you. I hope you're not carrying his burden on your shoulders. Seek support from friends and family, maybe even try out therapy. You deserve a peaceful and fulfilling life, and I hope you find the strength to move forward. Update number 1. Hey, it's Sadie again. It's been about 2 weeks since my husband, Paul, was admitted to the hospital. Well, I have news. Paul is no more. He passed away just this morning as the doctors tried to keep him alive, and in the past few days I've tried gathering my thoughts. I even told my father about Paul's infidelity. He told me to come and live with him for a while, but I could not just leave Paul, leaving him displeased. When I felt confident enough to speak with Paul without breaking down, I entered his room and took a seat beside him for the first time. He looked at me with disdain, which surprised me, and I held back my words. He accused me of being the reason for his current condition, and his voice low and tired, yet filled with as much venom as possible. His words hit me like a blow to the gut, and I tried to explain that I had asked the doctors, and they informed me that his condition had been steadily deteriorating, so this outcome was inevitable. But he responded with a bitter laugh, calling me naive for believing the doctors. In frustration, I pointed out that he would not be in this condition if he had not rushed to be with his mistress. Then I laughed, my laughter sounding hollow yet condescending, and asked about her whereabouts. I've been here every day, yet I haven't seen her once. He fell silent at that, confirming that she likely knew about his health and still did not come to visit. As the silence dragged on, I reminded him that he should be grateful I was by his side. His nostrils flared and he gave me a sharp look. I knew at that moment that if he had the strength, he might have struck me. Yet, I also knew that if he weren't in such a vulnerable condition, I might have struck back. He told me that I was free to leave and that he wasn't keeping me tethered to his side. He even suggested it might be better if he did not have to keep looking at my face while he recovered. I openly pondered how he managed to win her over in the first place. Hoping to drive my point home, I questioned how many lies he must have told to persuade her to be with a man like him. He remained silent, but his jaw tensed and I felt a sense of triumph. I promptly stood up and inquired a sweet tone if he would prefer me to call his mistress to keep him company instead. He did not respond and continued to stare ahead. In an attempt to hurt him further, I mentioned that I would inform her to visit him, and we would see if she ever came to see him. Yet, when I went out, I had no intention of actually going to her house. I didn't want to take even the slightest chance that she might visit him. Well, I wanted him to feel as little as he had made me feel with his own words. Even then, I was sure that his mistress would not have come to check on him regardless. If she had not done so in the past 2 weeks, she would not be doing so now on the insistence of his wife. Then today I got a call from the hospital informing me of his demise this morning. And I still did not cry for the man who tried his hardest to break my spirits just because he was bitter and unfaithful. Update number 2. It's Sadie again. Today was Paul's funeral, and it was a crap show. Everything was fine until Christy, Paul's mistress, showed up with her fake tears and fake condolences. I had done all the preparations in a state of numbness. I had called Paul's family, a few of his construction work friends, and they brought flowers for Paul and words to comfort for me. His boss helped me set things up when he heard of the demise. I didn't know how to react to Paul's death. On one hand, I was so angry and wanted to be happy that he was dead, but on the other hand, I felt this sense of displacement from what I knew. I could tell the kids weren't sure either. My father kept them on his side all through the service, and when I got to the podium to say a few words for Paul in front of the small gathering, that's when I saw her. Christy sat in the last row dressed up in pretty all black, like she had no cares in the world. That enraged me, but I kept my calm in front of everyone. I spoke a few words like I practice in my head more than 100 times already and got off. When his casket was lowered, only his parents, the kids, and my father were left, and Christy. She came forward to me and asked when his will would be read, and she was loud enough for Paul's parents to hear. I whirled on her, confused, and asked what she was talking about. She shrugged, inquired how his millions of dollars would be split, and before I could burst out into her face, she continued saying that she deserved a fair share of his money. She and Paul had a deal. That's when I realized how he slept with her and he lied about his millions of dollars. I laughed out loud in her face, shocking her and everyone present. I could not believe of any of this. When my emotions were under control, I told her that there was no will. There's no money. He had lied to her, and his face grew into an ugly scowl as she called me a lying pig. Paul had told her that she would get her fair share after her death. Well, Paul's mother questioned Christy's presence, and I explained her son's infidelity. However, Christy seemed solely fixated on me, urging me to show some respect, and Paul for not to tell her lies in front of his dead body. I could not help but laugh at her audacity. She was unbelievable. That agitated Christy, and she lunged at me. We both ended up on the ground, and my head hit the ground with a loud thump. Just before she could scratch my face with her nails, I managed to push her aside and position myself above her. The family behind me was in an uproar, but I had reached my limit with her. I threw a punch at her face, splitting her lip instantly, and before I could go do any more harm, my dad intervened, grabbing me and pulling me away. I screamed at her for destroying my marriage and then having the audacity to appear at Paul's funeral. I made it clear that even if Paul had, actually possessed millions of dollars, I would have ensured she did not receive a single penny of it. Paul's parents, along with the rest of the attendees, threw a crying and angry Christy out of the funeral. Can you imagine how shameless you have to act like this, like she did? Well, and Paul? How pathetic of him. I wish that he were here so I could laugh in his face for his pathetic lies. Update number 3. Hey, it's Sadie again, and something huge happened. It had only been 6 days after Paul's funeral when my next-door neighbor Henry showed up at my house with some distressing news. I've known Henry since we went to the same school. We weren't friendly, we just knew of each other, and he had moved in just a few weeks ago, and I had not had the opportunity to welcome him with everything going on. When I welcomed him, he stepped inside. Without any introduction, he told me that there was a suspicious car with tinted windows parked outside my home. I was confused, and he headed for the living room. He motioned for me to stay hidden and looked at it stealthily. Indeed, there was a car on the other side of the road that I had not noticed. He mentioned that it had been there for days, and he had noticed it following my car when I went to work every day. I was shocked for not having realized it myself, and I contemplated what to do next, unable to figure out who it could be. What if they meant harm to my kids? Fear crept in. But Henry reassured me that he would take care of it, so we decided to approach the driver from the back. We exited through the back door and stealthily made our way to the vehicle. Once we reached the car, I positioned myself in front of it to prevent the driver from easily driving away while Henry knocked on the window. The driver stared at the car and began honking at me, ignoring Henry's calls to reveal their face. His knocks on the window grew louder as the horn continued to blare. He threatened to call the police if the driver did not identify themselves, and that's when the window rolled down to reveal Christy. I breathed a sigh of relief and slumped against the side of the car. I asked her why she was stalking my kids and me, and she snorted and replied as if it were interesting enough to stalk, saying she was scoping out our future property. Well, I couldn't help but laugh in her face, thinking she was delusional, and I pointed to that shabby house behind me and asked if that was the property she meant. Then I informed her that the house belonged to me. Paul had no money. He used up his savings for his last hospital stay and left us with nothing. I could tell she did not believe me when she called me names. That's when I grew serious and warned her that I would call the police if she did not stop her delusional behavior. She responded that she would not be discouraged by me, insisting that nothing could keep her away from what belonged to her. I signaled to Henry, indicating that we should give her some space to leave, and Henry was, of course, quite confused. I did not want to fill him in at the moment, but I knew that I would have to do so for the future, in case she returned. His anger towards both Paul and Christy on my behalf brought a sense of relief. We soon parted ways, and I thanked him profoundly for his help. I would not have confronted an unknown car by myself if he hadn't have been with me. I also knew that Christy will return, which scares me for the children. I have to work every day, and the kids come back from school. Maybe I can ask Dad to babysit them, but he's working sometimes and would leave the kids at home alone. It was a safe community, so it wasn't a big deal to leave the kids alone in the house for a few hours. Maybe I can ask Henry to keep an eye out for them. After all, he only works the night shift. Update number 4. Hey guys, it's Sadie with a major update. It had been radio silent from Christy for about a month, and I had grown a little relaxed, hoping that she'd given up her quest. Today, my dad could not babysit the children, so I called Henry to keep an eye out of the house after my dad dropped the kids at home. Henry and I had been growing friendly recently. We would greet each other if we ran into each other as I went to work and he would be coming home, and I even sent homemade cookies over through my daughter. He sent flowers showing his thanks. We have even texted a few times and he sounded like a good guy, so I wasn't too scared to leave the kids under his care for a few hours before I returned. But it must have been only a few hours since the kids returned when Henry called me. He sounded breathless and my heart started beating fast. I stood up and ran to my car even before he informed me of the situation. Apparently, he saw Christy's car parked in front of my house. It was empty. So he got scared and simply knocked on my front door only to hear crashes coming from inside, but no reply. He was rushing to the back door as he called me. He narrated what he saw through the kitchen window. The small dining table has been smashed in rage, but he didn't have eyes on Christy or the kids. I drove as fast as possible, and he tried calling out Christy, hoping to talk some sense into her. Christy only appeared out from the bedroom window a moment later to tell him to mind his own business. He informed me that he could hear the kids crying, which scared both of us. He said that they were calling the cops and hung up on me. I was shaking by the time I got to the house and Henry was still knocking on the door. I had the key and I rushed past him to open it. I was almost going to rush inside when Henry stopped me because the cops arrived. We informed them that Christy had taken my kids hostage and was trespassing into my home. They went in, grabbed the children, and, well, my kids who were locked in the bathroom. They were a crying mess and I tried to console them, but when they pushed Christy through the front door, I pushed them towards Henry and lunged at her. There was a cop who had a restraining on me as I screamed for him to stop it. She had tried to hurt my kids. Her eyes looked crazy when she said that she would not let me ruin her plans. She had her whole future planned out and I was being a thorn in her side. The cops later informed me that she had been snooping through my laptop and looking for a will through my house after she had shoved the kids in the bathroom. The kids are all right. Frank has some bruising where she grabbed him, and Tina has a little bump on her forehead where she fell. But the cops advised that we call for a restraining order against Christy and file a court case for trespassing and kidnapping. Well, I'll be filing the case tomorrow. I'm just in shock at how the situation escalated so fast. Everything has been quiet for some time, and then suddenly, she had taken my kids hostage without any regard, and I think the kids are in shock, to be honest, and my dad has brought all of us into the house for a few days. We're safe, just startled. Update number 5. Hey everyone, this is Sadie with one last update. It's been 6 months since Christy took my children hostage. In hopes of finding Paul's will, and a few things have happened since. So, I thought I should catch you guys up. Christy was convinced that, well, she's going to be convicted and is in jail for 2 years. A week ago is when she got convicted. We'll be getting a restraining order against her when she's out, and She was mean through the court proceeding, but there was enough evidence against her crime against my kids and I. Henry tested against her, and so did my dad and Paul's parents. She was angry and screamed at me when her punishment was announced. Clearly, she did not know what she did as a mistake, and I had thought that seeing her suffer would make me happy, but it did not. I was emotionally exhausted by the time the case was over and just wanted to move on in my life. My dad threw us a party when we won the case, and Frank and Tina were happy to have an occasion to eat as much pizza as they wanted. Regardless of the fact that Christy was in jail and Henry was around, my dad insisted that I put a security system at my home. I promised I would do so just as I earned enough money to afford it. Henry helped me clean up when everyone was gone and the kids were asleep, and he asked me out. Initially, I was hesitant, but he told me to think about it before he left. He had been incredibly nice to my family, and I'm thinking about giving him a shot. I think this will be the end of it unless Christy decides she still doesn't believe me when she comes out in a few years. I hope she would have matured by then and would just leave us alone. Anyways, thank you for following me on my journey. I really appreciate it. It means a lot to me. Alright guys, so that one was a wild ride. I want to know what you think Christy is going to do when she gets out of jail. So go ahead and drop your comments down below in the comment section. I want to know your thoughts about this story and how you would have handled it if you were in OP's position. Guys, thank you for joining me on today's video. If you guys are new to the channel, I want to welcome you to it. My name is Mr. Reddito, and I narrate stories every single day. Some of these stories could be dramas involving mother-in-laws, in-laws in general. It could be wedding fiascos, it could be HOA stories, it could be Karen in the wilds. I mean, it goes on and on. So if you want to be a part of these daily stories just like today, the 3 best ways to support me and make sure you don't miss out on these videos is number 1, click that subscribe button with those bell notifications. Number 2, hit that like button. And number 3, drop a comment down below. I'll see you guys tomorrow. And remember, it's cool to be kind. Peace.